Massive Impact is a startup focused on helping the consumer understand the complexities of what goes into making the amazing outdoor gear and apparel that we all use. Only in the past few years have I come to think about what I purchased and what that impact was on the environment, the place that I was trying to support. It only recently occurred to me that I might actually be doing damage to the lands that I love by supporting brands who didn't give a. That was a wake-up call for me. And I knew I wasn't alone in not having a center of gravity, not having one place that could be trusted. It became evident to me that I probably wasn't the only one who cared about how the people were treated that were making these items. Our goal is to have as many conversations as possible with thought leaders and influencers and manufacturers and athletes. We're here to tell the stories of those that care. And of course, Patagonia is leading the charge. There are a ton of others, including independent brands that you should know about. This video podcast is just the beginning. Sign up for the newsletter at massiveimpact.co. Join us in this revolution. I see the merit in the squeeze of parents. No need to sugarcoat it. I see the need for being married, but who would condone it when your dreams are being married? Welcome to the Massive Impact Sustainability Podcast. We're super excited to have Stacy Bare join Margot and myself. Margot, I'll just have you do a quick intro for those that didn't see the first two podcasts. And if you have not seen those, please check us out on YouTube and Stitcher and iTunes and all the things. And of course, check us out on Facebook, Massive Impact CO, and same thing on Instagram, and I think I already said Facebook. But welcome. We're super excited for episode 3. And Margot, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, glad to be here. So my name is Margot Johnson, and my background is in social work and tech. So I've been working in the startup space for a couple of years now, looking at the intersection of social impact and business. And I'm happy to be joining on this podcast and talking about some of the everyday applications of our decisions as consumers around the things we buy to get to go have fun and play outside, and also just more broadly about the spirit of adventure and why we create the kinds of professions and programs we do as people who care about the space.
Absolutely, and I suppose I should say hello. My name is Dave Mayer. I'm the founder of Massive Impact. As you saw in the intro, our goal is to help folks navigate outdoor gear and apparel realm and understand why sustainable outdoor gear and apparel is important as we move forward, and the impacts that it has on the planet. We are leading by example through our hats here that we actually made alongside Stacy Bare, our featured guest for today. So Stacy, why don't you say hello and introduce yourself briefly, and we can talk about the hats and all the good stuff.
Yeah, my name is Stacy Bare, and I am currently the principal of Bare LLC, which is a small boutique consulting firm, and our goal is to help organizations improve their leadership and fund development and strategic planning. Work primarily with organizations in the outdoor space, outdoor nonprofits, outdoor companies, and also working to develop what I'm really excited about right now is developing a larger program called Stoke and Awe to expand the opportunities for substance-free outdoor programming across the country. And I also am the founder and run a program called Adventure Not War, which is helping myself and other veterans get back to the places where we fought or cleaned up after war to experience those countries from a perspective of adventure versus military or soldiering.
So Stacy and I met, seems like going on a decade ago, and become fast friends largely because I wanted to be affiliated with somebody who was 6'8", and who could be my bodyguard. But you know, he's one of the funniest people I know, and obviously one of the most genuine people, and passionate and a great orator. So maybe even a few steps back, Stacy, obviously you're a veteran and a passionate supporter of veterans' causes, and not to mention the ones you've started on your own. But will you give us even sort of the 30,000 foot and how you got to become a successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's interesting to think about what a successful entrepreneur means, right? Because it's certainly my career path reads more like a sine curve rather than kind of a straight line moving up. And talking to a friend of mine who happens to be an astrophysicist that I grew up with, he told me that you actually get further on a sine curve than you do, if you were to try and straighten that curve, right? So there's this need for peaks and valleys and rising and relaxing in some ways, or failing might be another word for some of the relaxing I've been able to do, just falling down the mountain as opposed to sitting on the mountainside. But I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things. I wasn't one of those kids who had a bunch of startups selling lemonade or cutting everybody's grass. I was much more focused on kind of my own games in my mind and imagination and creating new worlds with my friends and running around in South Dakota where I grew up. And all I really ever wanted to do was join the Army, or the Navy actually, and then I was too tall for the Navy. And the Army didn't turn out to have the same goals and dreams that I thought it had for me, and so I left in 2004. I should back up and say I got an ROTC scholarship to the University of Mississippi, graduated and commissioned in 2000, and left the Army for the first time in 2004. Went out and did some landmine clearance for a couple of years, got recalled to the Army, spent a year in Baghdad, went back to graduate school thinking I was going to do urban design, which is what my master's degree is in, and fantastic program thinking about design thinking, and got kind of puked out into a massive recession in Boulder, Colorado. And the job that I got was around sustainability with veterans. And I didn't think I was going to do really anything specific with sustainability. And I certainly didn't think I wanted to work in the veteran community because I didn't see myself at that time as a veteran. My veteran status was a technicality, but I didn't want it to define who I was. And then through my own challenges and kind of struggles, really adjusting post-graduate school. I mean, graduate school kind of was a difficult adjustment after the military, but it was kind of a container that I could move through and had a defined path where life after graduate school didn't. And so, Veterans Green Jobs was a startup nonprofit, and during that time I started climbing and thought, this is great for me. What could it do for other veterans? There weren't at the time a lot of other veteran outdoor programming, and then I started putting together a climb. One of the students who was in a Veterans Green Jobs class, Nick Watson, Gulf War I era veteran, former Army Ranger, came up to me and said, have you ever climbed a mountain before or guided a climb? I said no. He said, that's what I do in my other job. And we got together, and that's how Veterans Expeditions was founded. So my path in entrepreneurship was just trying to solve a need for myself and then solve a need for my community. And that has led to, that led to a 7-year stint at Veterans Expeditions. Is still going, but there really wasn't enough salary for both of us. And I took a job at the Sierra Club thinking I would be there for a year or two and rejoin Nick with VetX. And we continued working together for a couple of years while I was at the Sierra Club, but I was afforded the opportunity really to be an entrepreneur within a large organization, which was super exciting, and did that for 7 years and felt like my leadership and what I had wanted to achieve at the Sierra Club, I had achieved what I felt like I could achieve, and that it was time for new leadership at the Sierra Club outdoor programming. And so then I just jumped out on my own again and worked for a short time with another organization in an interim role. And then from that gave me the opportunity to kind of jump out and really put all these different ideas I've had in my head to work. And that's actually really frightening because now I'm in that process of figuring out how to turn all these ideas in my head, how to create the focus and go out and make that stuff happen. But I think in part it's because I'm just trying to solve for a problem that I see in my life and my community. And if there was another organization that I felt was doing it or doing it the way I wanted to do it, I'd be more than happy to hop on board.
And you're in Salt Lake City currently?
Yep, I'm in Sandy, Utah, which is just south of Salt Lake. So we moved out of the city a few months ago just to be closer to the mountains and closer to my partner's work in Utah Valley University down in Orem.
And evidently, Sandy, Utah does not believe in broadband internet. Just giving you a hard time. We got a fair amount of latency on your side, and I apologize to the viewers that of all the funny faces that Stacy's making inadvertently.
Yeah, because I do like to make funny faces routinely.
Right. We can hear you just fine. That's the good news.
That's not even the internet connection. He's just doing
Yeah, just me meshing with you.
it.
Uh,
Well,
Margot,
I
I'll
want
let you
to
jump
ask
in.
about I think it's really cool that your background is in urban design and design thinking, and I imagine there's a fair amount of like empathy practice that comes with that, in addition to then re-engaging with the community that maybe you initially were like, oh, this is just being a veteran is just one characteristic that I have. It's not my fundamental identity. And then it sounds like you went through this revelation of really engaging with that community and bringing your lived experience into working with veterans, and particularly in sustainability and outdoor spaces. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about like kind of what that emotional journey was like of meeting other people who maybe shared some similarities to you, and how you saw the impact starting to happen and working in the outdoor space together.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the fundamental identity piece is a good place to start with that, right? Because and I think if you look at the broader body politic of our country right now, there's a lot of people really struggling around that same question: who am I, and who are we as a nation, and where do we want to go? And I think regardless of where you're at on the political spectrum right now, there's both a little bit of an aching for a past that maybe never really happened, and a real concern about what the future is going to look like and how are we going to get through that. And design thinking was really helpful in that, because you're looking, especially from an urban design and a building design space, right? You're thinking about, well, what's the identity of this building and what are the uses? And when I got to graduate school in 2007, multi-use buildings were a really big deal, right? And walkable neighborhoods and ground floor retail. And how do we create the identity of a space? And so I was really great at projecting those ideas of identity onto other spaces without ever really engaging in that with myself. And I think in part because I just, I didn't want to be a statistic. And at the time, a lot of veterans, in 2007, there was a lot of negative news about suicide and alcoholism and addiction. And even though I had suicide ideologies and was an addict and was an alcoholic, I didn't identify as those things. And so identifying as a veteran maybe felt like I had to identify as those things. But then as I continued to kind of slide into a pretty dark space, it was the veteran identity that I was able to grab onto that kind of helped bring me back up out of that, and other veterans around me who had helped, lead the way kind of in this path. And I've been lucky enough to meet people like Doug Peacock, who wrote Grizzly Years, right? He comes back from Vietnam, spends 35 years plus with grizzly bears in Montana, and realized that the outdoors for me helped me to add on to my identity, right? So as opposed to being just a veteran, I became a climber. And that allowed me to transition, I think, ultimately into being a partner and a boyfriend, and later a husband and a father. And over the journey, over the last 11 years since I've been home, and even the 9 years that I've known Dave, that veteran identity, I think, it started here because I didn't really want to, I just kind of wanted to shove it off to the side. And then it became the core of who I was. And it became all of who I was. And then when I started recovery from substance, that became a huge part of who I was. And so there are these two things that were cohabiting together, and sometimes probably rubbed against each other, and different identities that were kind of pushing on one another. And then over time, as opposed to those things continuing to be the core and other things coming up, right? Like the need to be a healthy partner, the need to be a healthy father, the need to be a better friend, the need to be a community member. These things became pillars as well. And so that veteran core, I don't think it's necessarily receded. I think the rest of my life has grown. And so my veteran status and who I am as a veteran is still an important part of who I am, but it's not all that I am, where several years ago it was in very many ways all that I was. And I don't think that's necessarily unhealthy. And I think if Stacy of 2018 was talking to Stacy of 2007, Stacy of 2007 might just say, well, fuck you. That's never going to happen to me. You're abandoning your brothers and sisters. What are you doing? And I think the hard part is allowing for that growth and allowing for people to have their own pathways and growth around, especially when it comes to, their own identity. And that's, I think, the real challenge. And how do you navigate that? And I've been lucky enough to have friends like Dave and my partner Mackenzie, and through a huge chunk of that journey. But that kind of leads into the outdoor space, and because, you know, in terms of formative identity, and I think being outside allows you to sit with your own paradoxes and your own hypocrisies and accept you, right? Because the outdoors really, it's like the mountains are calling. The mountains aren't calling. The mountains don't care in many ways. They don't have cell phones. But so I think, and then that leads to a larger conversation of, in many ways, sustainability, right? Because how do you be sustainable as a person? How do you avoid burnout? How do you not create waste and excess and damage in your own life? And so I think as you begin to ask those mental questions, the physical questions of sustainability become a natural next step. And maybe for some people, it's the other way around, right? Starting with how do I create a more sustainable world? And I think the other thing that to really point out, and I see this in a lot of different areas, right, is that if you're doing the work yourself for other people, like, so if I'm helping other veterans outdoors, and this was certainly my path, I didn't want to do the work on myself for a really long time. And I think you can even sometimes see that with larger sustainability efforts, right? Well, if the company's doing the work, are the people in the company actually doing the work themselves, or figuring out how to make it work in their own lives? Or since they work for a company that has, you know, a high score on the Higg Index, do they not worry about it?
So how, kind of following right on that, part of what we've been talking with folks about as guests on this podcast and trying to understand is to kind of have this pragmatic voice for like, okay, so what do we do? How do we start to take those baby steps as individuals and be able to be more thoughtful in our consumption patterns, or to, when you kind of mentioned those physical questions of like, okay, so now how do I walk the walk? I'm curious, like, outside of platonics, like how do you live that? Like, what experiments are you running in your daily life that help you embody that to the way that you want to?
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge, right? As somebody who I've had the opportunity to adventure globally, and so my carbon footprint's super high. Part of how I make my living is speaking and engaging with other folks, and podcasts are super great, but people don't want to hear a speaker on a screen. They want to see the speaker in person. They want to exchange oxygen and carbon molecules with that individual, right? And so it is something I worry about. And what are the carbon offsets? So I think, you know, things in my own life, it's thinking about really the amount of clothing or boots or jackets or skis. Like, what are those things? Like, do I need or just want this new thing? And is the want high enough? And what can I get rid of in that same place, right? So, I mean, even little things from my partner and I and our family, every New Year's Day is a massive clean out. And the goal is that every year we're cleaning out less and less because we're bringing in less and less. And that's super hard when you have a little person at home, because there is an absolute arms race between grandparents around stuffed animals and toys, right? And stuffed animals are, I would have to think, the least sustainable product, right? I mean, plastic and fur filled with little plastic pellets and beads or stuffing, and you can only reuse a plastic animal, or a toy animal, so many times, like these little polyester fur balls. So I think if anybody could figure out how to do truly sustainable, like, toy design that doesn't keep and hold germs, I think there'd be a huge opportunity there for somebody. And we do, I mean, it is interesting to think about even our recycling and our composting compared to the amount of trash that we used to get rid of versus the amount of trash we get rid of now. And there's little things like, reusable coffee mugs, or buy compostable versus plastic. And I think those are all really important things to do, but I also don't think people should beat themselves up too much about some of those individual practices, like, because a lot of it too flips around, right, with sustainability and simplicity, right? If I have less stuff, there's less stuff in my mind. There's all sorts of psychological research that shows less clutter is a good thing. So we're trying to figure out how to do that in our life a little bit more. There's the 33-piece wardrobe challenge, right? Can you live just with 33 things in your closet, including shoes, t-shirts, pants? You get an exemption for outdoor gear, but then you can only use your outdoor gear as outdoor gear, right? And so for me, that's difficult because I'm pretty much always in plaid or wool shirts. but I think a lot of it really comes down to pressuring and putting the pressure on, especially municipal, county, and state governments and the businesses where you can really have an impact in where you shop. Because that is really going to make a much bigger impact ultimately than even a little bit of recycling. People should do everything they can. Little bits add up. But, I think there was an article a couple of weeks ago, right? Like 100 companies are responsible for about 70% of the overall carbon output that is leading to climate change. And so what does that mean? Do I just not fly anymore? I mean, that's how I'm making my living right now. But I think we have to move that technology forward and argue for smart policies. And it's something that I'm surprised neither party has really picked up on yet. But energy independence, right? Like our energy and grid system is vulnerable to a central attack. And when we lose power, everybody loses power. Why aren't we creating jobs and opportunities to make sure that every home and business that has a roof that leads towards solar isn't generating power, and that we have a massive distributed solar power grid and wind power or other that just reduces these sort of central types of attacks. So I think there's a huge national security argument to be made for really changing the way we do power. That's kind of a long, circuitous answer to your question, but.
Well, it's kind of the ripples, right? It's like seeing all the different spheres of influence, like all the way from I'm holding a reusable coffee cup today, maybe not yesterday, but today I am, and then moving all the way out to what's possible in the future at a policy level. And it's not an expectation that we hold all of that in our minds every single day, but instead being able to have a little bit of tolerance for that complexity and doing the best we can.
Totally. And understanding and the paradox there. And I mean, I think it's also, there's lots of stuff that we can do to not use plastics anymore, right? I mean, the compostable industry of reuse is exploded. And I think that's a big thing. I mean, Dave's and you all at Massive Impact and looking at hemp hats and stuff like that. And I think what we fail to realize is how sustainability can generate new economic opportunities, even within a system of capitalism. And I think where we went wrong as kind of the global environmental movement is, I mean, if you're a coal miner, right, like your life has probably been difficult for several generations. You've been kicked in the teeth. You've been underpaid. You've lived in horrific conditions, but you've been able to make money. And even if the only thing that you've been able to purchase is from the company store, you've been able to have things. And now, we kind of came along, and the environmental movement seemed to say, I think a lot of coal miners heard it was, look, not only have you lived kind of this rough life and you're dying at early ages, but you're also the problem. And you're also making my vacations at ski resorts are now at risk. And so you need to lose your job, which has provided community and which has allowed you to maybe go on vacation and has allowed you to send your kids off to college and create a better life for themselves. And now we're going to take that away versus, look, you guys have done a great job. You've powered America. Think of all the benefits that you've brought to this country because, I mean, my dad didn't have electricity in his house until like the late 40s or early 50s. And he grew up in Southeast West Virginia. And it was coal that brought that power to his house. And it was coal that brought him an education. And it was coal that allowed him to move on with his life and do all the amazing things he did and raise two kids. And so how do we look at that and say, thank you? But the economic reality is natural gas is now cheaper. And hopefully soon that's going to give us a bridge to, and I know there's a lot of challenges around natural gas, but that's going to give us a bridge to a more sustainable technology. And we want to engage with you and retrain with you to make sure that you continue to move forward and that you continue to make the type of positive impact in our country that you have been making. And that's going to mean a shift in skills. And that might mean, hey, now that all that coal is out of the ground, we're going to plant hemp there because hemp can help leach out and clean ground, and you're going to clean this place back up, and it's going to become a thriving economy and environmental area. And you can make hats, and there's all these other industrial applications, and be creative and think about how to do this. And we haven't done that as a nation. Instead, we just kind of said, well, fuck you, coal. And if you're a coal miner, like it's like people are like, well, I can be against the war and for the troops. That's true, but that's a really hard line to walk. And it takes some nuance, and we don't seem to have time for nuance now. And so that's kind of like, yeah, like how do we go from that? So everybody's holding on to that sustainable cup, and that sustainability becomes a long-term American value. And it shouldn't be something just on the left. I mean, the whole notion of conservative, right, is that we're holding on to these things that we hold dear in our environment and our nation and our families, even though the family structure is beginning to look more, I think, realistic, and people aren't being forced into old versions of what a family was supposed to look like. These are things we want to hold on to. And I think sustainability is the pathway, or we can, if we're smart about it, that pathway is sustainability, and that pathway is actually a giant superhighway, which is probably a bad metaphor.
Will you? So I know you were a big part of, and have been, and continue to be a big part of the Outdoor Industry Association's Together We Are a Force campaign. Will you talk a little bit about that and how that actually bridges left and right, conservative and liberal? It's not just us versus them. And, you know, I think you, better than most, have been talking about sort of that. Maybe double life isn't a fair way to say it, but you know, you grew up in a conservative area, and Army is typically fairly conservative, but you know, you believe in climate change, right? And so, can you bring that all together, and then let's talk a little bit about Stoke and Awe as well.
Yeah, sure. I'll just whip that all up, Dave. Yeah, I mean, I've loved the Outdoor Industries Association's Together We Have Force campaign, because, I mean, the point is, in many ways, right, is to bring together people who, on the outset, might look like competitors. So different industry, you know, different brands in the industry, or the campaign I got to do was with my friend Kevin Rosenberg, who was running a really cool outfitter company called Gear to Go, and it was mail order rental outdoor gear plus you know, guided trips. And now he's focused just on guided trips. And Rosie is also a lot shorter than I am, and he was a Navy pilot and I was Army, so there was some fun things around that. But the goal is, like, look, we might have competing interests, right? Because at the time I was at Sierra Club Outdoors. I'm trying to get a bunch of people outdoors. I'm trying to get people on my programming. He's trying to get people on programming. But we've got to see that as like cooperation, right? Because the more healthy places there are, the more healthy landscapes there are, the less severe weather there are, the more opportunities there are for us to help get other, you know, connect other people to the outdoors. And I think that's really critical, right? I think the challenge with the outdoor industry is that we are, whatever, I think it's like a $400 billion, I should know that number, but $400 billion industry. But how much? The 887 billion. So I was more than half off, which is embarrassing for me. But it's really spread out. It's really diverse, and in many ways, it is what there are some big companies there, but it is what we think about when we think about the health of kind of Main Street, right? Lots of smaller mom and pop organizations. There's massive brand diffusion right now. There's more outdoor brands than there ever been. I think as we see 3D printing increase, people are going to be able to start brands out their back doors. There's micro ski companies in the same way that there were micro brews 20 years ago. You're going to have micro. You know, hey, I'm going to build a better jacket specifically for me. And in many ways, we're seeing that as an echo to kind of the 60s and 70s in the early part of the outdoor industry, when you would buy a backpack kit and then sew it together, or buy a jacket kit and sew it together. So I think, you know, is there anything new? But it's a new expression of old ideas. And so the more we can do that as together and let people know there is a voice and there is a connection here, and it's not just these individual mom and pop stores, but it's people coming together to promote this larger idea, but that time outdoors is healthy. And if we have a healthy outdoors, we can have a healthy economy. And I think, I don't know where it became such a left and right issue. I mean, if you look at the passage of the Wilderness Act, it was nearly unanimous, right? I think there was one dissenting congressman. If you look at, you know, the EPA started under Nixon, and we've seen lots of echoes of Nixon in this current administration, with the exception of the environmental work. So at some point in this country, regardless of left or right, we knew that environmental action was necessary, and we were proud of that. And that was clearly something that was very bipartisan. I'm not sure what's happened along the way. I mean, I think there's a concern about regulations. There's a concern about how real is it. But we've kind of got to move to this point, I think, where I don't even know if it's helpful to talk about climate change, because let's talk about the things that are going to impact people's lives directly. So let's talk about energy security. Let's talk about opportunities for them to be part of their own energy future. Let's go back to this idea of how can we, rugged individualism. If we really believe that rugged individualism is a value that America wants to hold true, then hell yeah, we need solar systems and micro wind turbines and microgrids. And these are things that I think we've got to speak about in a language that everybody can get on board with. Because I guess I've never really thought of myself as like a bleeding heart leftist, but I think that the politics of the day would probably scoot me over to a progressive viewpoint. But a lot of those viewpoints are really rooted in historical conservative values on the right that seem to have, a basis for all of the American political system to go into. And I think a lot of times it's just because we are so removed from a lot of people are really removed from the areas where these types of things are really happening, right? I mean, North Carolina gets slammed by a hurricane, but how many people live in North Carolina? And so I think what you see with the American political system right now too is that in proximity, people are really kind to each other for the most part still in this country. That's not always the case, but then all of a sudden we remove ourselves from that and we have limited tubes of information that come at us and we're not able to see things on the periphery. And I think that's where climate and energy are certainly that way. People don't think about still where their energy comes from if they've never had energy disruption. People don't think about coal ash if they've never had to breathe in coal ash. People don't think about the devastating impacts of a hurricane if they've never been through that. And I mean, even you look at, where homes have been built along the beach, even in the last 10 or 15 years that are now being, destroyed. So I think we've got to find a way that connects with people where they're at. And I think there are ways to explain to people how to move things forward in a way that's beneficial to them. But again, I feel like we've been kicking coal miners. I feel like we're kind of running around like, chickens with our heads cut off, as opposed to saying, well, here are ways that climate adaptation can benefit you. Here's how you can make a few more bucks. Here's how your life can get improved, versus telling people that their lives are just going to suck more. Because a lot of people in this country are not having a really good time anyway. And so telling them that their lives are going to suck even more if they don't change the few things that I think sometimes feel like are bringing some level of joy or at least contentment or at least helping to numb the pain. And now all of a sudden we're telling them that they're going to lose all that. Then they're just going to grab as much as they can before they go, myself included.
No, I think it's super important framing, framework. So let's talk about where you're headed with Bare Enterprises and Stoke and Awe, and how you're bringing folks together on your end.
Yeah. So I'm doing some consulting work with organizations that I think I get to align with values that I really believe in. And so that's been a lot of fun, and especially those organizations that are working towards kind of a healthcare outcome or an improved health and wellness outcome. And so with Stoke and Awe, I love to hear that there's a social worker on the call. I think that's a great way to think about sustainability and how we create these systems and framing and supporting larger populations, because as a social worker, I'm sure you can attest to the fact that regardless of economic or socioeconomic class, people are struggling, and not to say that one is struggling more or less than the other. And I think we sometimes get into a bad situation where we try to say this group needs more help than that group. Everybody needs help. And so with Stoke and Awe, I'm hoping to launch fully and formally Stoke and Awe later next year. I've got a few trips coming up that are informal, not really led trips, but just bringing people together, kind of thought leaders in the space, to figure out how we do a more specific substance-free outdoor programming. So we'll be looking to create 2, 4, and 6 day opportunities for people to get together who are interested in just spending some time substance-free. They might be in recovery. They might be interested in recovery. They might have never drank or used before. They might be an alumni group of a past recovery or treatment center. But the idea is just to have an intentional outdoor experience and create opportunities for people who are then interested, if they want more information, about recovery, if they want information, more information about, dealing with some traumas or health issues, that we then have some of those resources available immediately on the trip as a peer-to-peer counselor, or if it's a larger, I'm hoping to do a few clinics where we bring together, 50 or 100 people for a weekend for mountain biking or surfing, and so that people can just be in that space. And then if they have other questions about where they might want to go next, that we have those resources available for them. And so that's what I'm really excited about. And then I think the magic sauce will be how we figure out how to integrate those outdoor experiences into their everyday lives. And then how do we hand off those folks who want additional care to care management opportunities? Because I think for me, the outdoors was a very healing place, but it also allowed me to meet other people who were going down those pathways of, they were in recovery, or they were seeking therapy, or they were in therapy. And I thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it. But then there's not necessarily a mechanism in those experiences to help people navigate a very confusing pathway of recovery or trauma resources. And we're kind of in a system where if you do go down one pathway of recovery and it doesn't work for you, the people who are on that same path with you or in that same healing modality might say, you're at fault. You're just not trying hard enough. You're not doing the work. And we want to be able to say, well, hey, if this isn't working for you, try this, right? Like, let's find the right modality that works for you. And let's bring you back outside and let's keep you engaged. So that's what we're building, what I'm building. It's not there yet, but hopefully by June 1st, we roll out Stoke and Awe to the public with a few more events. And hopefully in 2 or 3 years, we've got enough data and evidence where this is maybe a pathway forward for people to get prescriptions to the outdoors, and that healthcare companies and employee benefit corporations are sending folks to us and helping us use the outdoors as a true healing mechanism. And that's the goal. And of course, along the way, we'll want to use the best, most sustainable, healthy products that we can use, because, before this phone call, I was looking at different things we want to add into some of our clinics, and even like healthy living, right, is a big portion of it. Because a lot of people just don't know how to cook healthy or eat healthy. And there's no shame in that, but we just need to create resources for that.
And we'll link below any websites or emails so you can get in touch with Stacy if you have questions about this on YouTube, etc. And we're obviously on iTunes. Any sort of final thoughts, Margot or Stacy? I'm super grateful for both your time. Obviously, wide-ranging call, and we could go on for easily another 40 minutes. Be sure to check out certainly Stacy's Adventure Not War work. Really, really inspiring stuff with some fellow veterans going back to the places of conflict where he served, and creating some healing around that. Any final thoughts from you guys?
Just thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I think the thing that it really comes back to for me is like kindness and connection to humans as humans.
Yeah.
It's funny that we're talking about the outdoors, but that's almost with everything in life. That's what it comes back to. And whether it's a coal miner or someone who's experiencing addiction and is looking for community, at the end of the day, like we can use our outdoors as a backdrop and have these great adventures, but we're also connecting with and empathizing with each other as people. So thank you for reminding us of that.
Totally. And I think that's a really hard part, because I think there's a lot of really kind people in the world who have gotten caught up in feeling some sense of dignity or belonging with other people by hating or being angry, and they're whipped up into a fervor right now. And I think the challenge that we always have is to figure out how to turn the other cheek and welcome those individuals back. And like Gabor Mate, right, who's a foremost an amazing resource on addiction and recovery, says, let's not ask why the drug, let's ask why the pain. And I think there's a lot of people in pain, and there's a lot of people deeply disconnected from the world around them. And by that, I mean they're not connected to the natural world. And whether you look at science or whether you look at religion as your framework for how you think about life, or somewhere in between, both science and religion, almost all religion, tells us the same thing that science does, and that is that we came from clay and water. We came from mud. And when we disconnect ourselves from that through layers of material and work and lifestyle and construction, that means we're going to be disconnected from the very essence of who we're supposed to be. And I think that is one of the things I've really been thinking a lot about is Genesis 2:7, right, where God creates Adam from clay and water or mud, and how that reinforces the scientific belief that we kind of came from the mud and stood back up. So I think it's really beautiful how science and religion sometimes reinforce each other. And the mystics knew long before the scientists did what really mattered. And science has just in many ways, I think, been reinforcing those thoughts of mysticism and that great religions have taught us. And that's to connect, and to connect to the outdoors, and to connect to other people, and to turn the other cheek, and to try and embrace people as individuals and seek out ways to ease that burden. And I think at the end of the day, that's what sustainability is trying to do. Burden.
Yep, and that's what we're trying to do, is build that community from right to left, from science to religion. This is sort of, we're all in this together, and just trying to educate one another. And truly, this has been one of the most fun calls I've had with you in 9 years, Stacy. So I'm super grateful. And we will see you on the flip side. So be sure to check us out at massiveimpact.co, on Facebook, Massive Impact CO, as well as Instagram, etc. And we'll send all the links below, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Ciao.
Thank you.
Thank you.